you are a proponent or not a proponent of expanding the college football playoff?
Not a proponent. I've said many times that I still believe that we need to have one less playoff teams than we have number of power conferences, because I'm a firm believer that as soon as you have an automatic bid, you ruin the regular season. At that point, I think that the regular season, in particular the non-conference, means very little, and teams with 3 and 4 losses have a legitimate opportunity to play themselves into the playoff, and I want to avoid that. I think that there's little tweaks that you can do to it, but I would like to avoid that.
I would actually disagree with you in just do I think we need to expand the playoff? Probably not. Maybe we could go to 6 if we did it. But I actually disagree with you in terms of the regular season doesn't matter. I think the conference season would matter more if you said, hey, look, we don't care what you do. You win your league, you get to go to the playoff, right? You win your league because that's what you have in every other sport, right? Is you win your league, and that would make those long-standing 100-year rivalries matter even more because all you got to do is win your league and you can get in.
You would have also had a Northwestern team this year, for example, that did not win a non-league game. Didn't win one. Lost to Akron, lost to Notre Dame, lost to Duke, and they would have had 60 minutes to play themselves into the playoff. Yeah, so, I mean, listen,
there's no perfect
either way.
The problem is there's no perfect system.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I can actually help you out, though, with your argument. They're both 2 touchdown lines. Like this idea that we need more teams. Like this is a year in which it's not every year where the Notre Dame argument would be the only thing that would take us away from. Look, we all know that Alabama and Clemson seem to be the 2 best teams, and you look at how thoroughly dominant they are. But
if there was ever an argument that we should have the old BCS system, it's this year. This feels like USC Texas of 05, right? When it's like, I don't care who number 3 was. I just want to see that game. I think this year, and to your point, I think what you're trying to say is like, listen, the argument between Georgia, Ohio State, and Oklahoma was somewhat riveting. I think they all had flaws. You could have made an argument for any one of them. The argument between UCF, Florida, and, who else? LSU, that doesn't interest me at all because I don't think those teams are particularly good in terms of a national championship conversation. I think they've had phenomenal seasons, but I don't think that we should be trying to include them into any sort of conversation for the national championship. I think that there's a difference between teams that have had great seasons and teams that should be allowed to compete for the national championship. But some have called me an elitist, like a big conference snob, but I guess I got to wear that.
Well, you are elite, and if that makes you an elitist, so help you. Okay, let's go to the Notre Dame Clemson matchup.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
I do too. In any other year, okay, if you strip Notre Dame's name off it, but maybe if you don't, right?
Okay.
Notre Dame beats Michigan,
yes,
USC, Florida State, Virginia Tech on the road,
yep,
Stanford. Right? Any other year, you'd be like, no way they survived that schedule. If they do, put them in. They're having to defend themselves. Meanwhile, Clemson, who has a ridiculous amount of talent and wiped the field with the ACC right after the Syracuse game.
Which the ACC was so bad. But
awful. But they lost their best interior defensive lineman to PED suspension. And, by the way, they do have a freshman quarterback. Mm-hmm. If there's a game which could be close, I think this is the game which could be super interesting.
I agree. I think actually both of them could be close. I think you can make a case for both underdogs, albeit a slim case. Now, I think that Notre Dame's case happens when you talk about the pass defense of Clemson. Clemson, when they have faced any type of attack from the passing side of the opposition, Jake Bentley from South Carolina, Kellen Mond from Texas A&M, A&M had 400 yards passing. South Carolina had 500 yards passing. So there are some holes in the secondary for the Clemson Tigers. And if you take away any sort of prowess on that defensive line, which now they're going to be without one of their best, I would maybe argue he is their best, in particular on the interior. Now all of a sudden you don't get to the quarterback all that often. Just per se, right? You have more opportunities to double team the other great players on the defensive line. What's to hold Notre Dame from throwing the ball for 350 yards? I think that that's totally legitimate. The way that Ian Book has played this season, the way that Notre Dame has been efficient once he got into the lineup, the way that they've scored with the football once he got into the lineup, he's been one of the most efficient players, right around 70% completion percentage. I think Notre Dame's going to be able to score some points on Clemson because of those reasons.
And I think they're pretty good defensively up front. Like some of us, we're dealing with this dated data of Notre Dame when they had Manti Te'o and there was the Lene Kakua thing.
Yeah.
And they go out there and like, man, Notre Dame doesn't look like they belong, right? They got in there on reputation. This is a Notre Dame team. Granted, it was a long time ago. They thrashed that Michigan offensive line. They're pretty good defensively up
They
front.
are good.
They're good offensively up front.
Up front.
And they got some dudes at skill positions. Like, it's not crazy to think athletically this is not a total mismatch.
Yeah, and you have to wonder how a true freshman is going to react, in particular against a very good front seven. What's to say, like, let's say Notre Dame and their front seven, they hold Etienne in check. And it's all on Trevor Lawrence, and he's all of a sudden getting a little bit of rush. What's to keep him from throwing the football to Notre Dame once or twice? Now all of a sudden you're in a game, maybe you're down. Any number of things can happen. I think Notre Dame's got a shot. I don't think that they blow me out of the water, but they're a very good football team. They're a very sound football team. Defensively, they're very tough up front.
You and Gus called the Red River rivalry.
Yeah.
Of course, if for people who forgot, Texas was up 3 touchdowns. In that
21
game.
in the fourth quarter.
And it was a wrap, and some people clicked off the TV, and then you turn around and like, wait a second. Kyler Murray decided it's not over yet. My issue with that is Oklahoma's defense is so bad. I don't think you can give up that many points, and this is a better offense than anyone will rightfully give it credit.
Sure.
I don't see it. I think Alabama is much better than anything they've seen in the Big 12, and I'm a Big 12 homer.
So I've heard this argument that, like, OU's defense is better than people give it credit for. And I've tried to make that case in the past. I don't see that this year. Not this year. After they made the change at defensive coordinator, they got worse, much worse. You look at they've given up 40 points 5 times this year, 40 or more points. I think that there's a really good chance that they give up 40 or more points again in this game. They're the last ranked pass defense in the country. And then you go over to the other side and you say, okay, what if Tua is not totally healthy? I think Tua at 80, 85, 90% can still put up a huge day. And here's why. If you look at where Tua struggled, and you can't even really call it struggling, it was against the 3 best defenses that he faced. You got Mississippi State in there, LSU in there. He was 4 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in those 3 games. The bottom 10 defenses he faced, guess what he did? 33 rips, 0 interceptions. 33 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Oklahoma is the last ranked pass defense in the country. This is one of the deepest and best wide receiver cores that we've got in college football. Speaking of Alabama, they've got 2 running backs that can run it. Oklahoma struggles immensely tackling in space. I don't know if Oklahoma can hold them under 50 points. I really don't, Doug.
I don't either. Okay, so then there's Kyler Murray. Now look,
can you score 52?
You're a guy who was a baseball player that came back and played football.
Yes, that's right.
So, but you've experienced life in the minor leagues.
It's awful.
And I've experienced life in the minor leagues in basketball. I think it's worse.
Oh,
I actually think it's worse. But I could be wrong. There is this assumption that, hey, baseball is a pot of gold, man. You get there, you're going to play for 20 years, you can make $100, $200, $300 million. But people forget, like, you don't make real money in baseball until your 5th year as a pro. And that's if you make it during that time. And, oh, yeah, by the way.
Exactly right.
By the way, guys are now platoon. Everybody's a platoon guy.
Right.
They're cutting everybody's salary. And so I'm sitting there going, like, look, the number 1 quarterback prospect in the draft decided to go back to Oregon. So that bumps everybody else who will declare up. If I'm Kyler Murray, while right now the air raid offense is all the rage and people are overlooking the fact that I'm 5'9", I take it. If I'm a first-round draft pick, I go play football.
Okay, listen, I think that there's two ways you can make the argument that he should go play football. And let me just talk about the financial one that you were originally making. You're absolutely right about the financial windfall that is a misconception about baseball. Yes, he signed a $4.6 million contract, and I don't want to scoff at that. That's real money.
Real money.
That is real money. He's been paid 1.5 of that, and he's due 3.16 in March. Okay, if he goes and plays football, he's got to pay back the $1.5 million. Here's the difference, though. After that 4.6, he's really done making money until I'd say at the earliest 5 years from now, because he's got to get to the big leagues, start his arbitration clock, and in his pre-arb years, he's going to be making less than $700,000. And everyone's thinking like, wait, less than $700,000? Yes, here are the numbers actually. In 2017, there were 399 of 963 big leaguers. 40% of the league making $700,000 or less.
Aaron Judge made $600,000.
Exactly, because he's a pre-arbitration player. So you don't even get to arbitration. By the way, once you're in arbitration, it's not like you're going to make a ton of money. You're going to make between $2 to $4.5 million. You're not making 16. That comes when you're 28, 29 years old.
Unless you're Mike Trout, unless you're Mookie Betts, unless you're and again, those are the exception, not the
right.
Okay, here's the big question.
But again, let me just say, the NFL, you go, let's say you get into the first round. Lamar Jackson's got a $9.5 million contract.
And he's playing in the pros. And he's playing in the pros now, as opposed to he won't play in the pros immediately or maybe even in the near future for the A's.
And then the second part of the argument is just a sentimental part. I believe that if he loved baseball more than football would already be done and he'd be a minor leaguer right now because he could have done that last summer. I think he's got some sentimental tie and love affair with the game of football, and I don't think that can be overstated.
He's undefeated.
I loved football more than baseball, and that's why I came back to it.
Okay, but last thing, and this is really important. He's going to be drafted late first, second, maybe even early first round. Realistically, is he an NFL starting quarterback?
I think that question is so much harder to answer now than it ever has been. 3 areas which we would knock him 5 years ago that now all of a sudden maybe you can't knock him. 1, the offensive system. Now we've seen Jared Goff, Pat Mahomes, Baker Mayfield come out of that system and have huge success in the National Football League, partly because of the evolution of the game towards this system at the next level. Then you've got young quarterbacks. You could say, well, young guys don't generally have success in this league. It's all about Brady, Manning, blah, 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 blah. That's not necessarily the case. Look at all the young quarterbacks having success now. And then the short factor. Is the height going to be an issue? Well, you got Drew Brees, you got Russell Wilson, and you got guys like Case Keenum having success. I know that Kyler is shorter than all of those guys, but if you put his combination of running ability and the ability to throw the ball, I think he can have success. I don't want to put it past him. I really don't. I think today's NFL is almost tailor-made for a guy like him to come into the league and really change the league.
He's on his way to call the Red Box Bowl, right? Red Box Bowl?
I'm Holiday Bowl.
Oh, your Holiday
right.
Bowl. So that's just a little scoot down the I-5. Utah taking on Northwestern, who you love. You thought should have been in the college football playoff. He's the one and only Joel Klatt. Thanks so much, Joel.
You bet, bud. Have a good one.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.